For me, I feel like when you're doing a game, you need to give people a reason to watch. And that doesn't have to do with the score or sometimes even how good a game it is. So if a player is at the free throw line, you have your moment to share some information about that player that would cause the viewer that may not otherwise be interested in the game to stay with the game. If the player at the free throw line, is getting her pilot's license because one day she wants to fly for an airline and you go into a conversation about that, or she's a scratch golfer aside from tennis and was basketball is a junior golf champion, or she's the daughter of so and so, those create interest in a viewer that are beyond the game. So if the game is uninteresting, or even it makes it even better when it is interesting, you're still going to watch because now suddenly as a human being, you have a connection to that athlete. That's one of the reasons it's growing in popularity, because the women's teams do such a good job connecting with their communities. So they work hard to put fans in the stands. And then once the fans come to the games, you see teams staying after games, whether they win or lose. They're signing autographs. They're handing things out. The women's game just seems to connect with their fans and the TV broadcasters as well in a way that I really like. And so I always have a smile on my face when I know I'm about to start college basketball, because I feel like I'm about to, enter into a world of, first of all, an incredible sport, especially in the SEC where I spend most of the season. And I'm going to be among my friends and family and learn new stories and connect with new young people that are very open to wanting to grow and be better.
Hi, everyone. Tim Kitzer with you, the voice of NBA Jam. From top journalists and authors to rising influencers and insiders, Hoopsology brings you the voices driving basketball forward. With elite guests and sharp analysis, Matt, Justin, and Alan keep you plugged into everything hoops. From downtown, boom shakalaka.
Since joining ESPN in 2004, my guest has called just about every sport: Wimbledon, the U.S. Open, the Olympics, volleyball, gymnastics, and this past weekend, Little League softball as well. But he's a fixture on college basketball broadcasts, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Please welcome ESPN play-by-play commentator Sam Gore. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Justin. Glad to be with you.
Thank you for coming on. Before we jump into your career and just your experiences with college basketball, we have a bit of a tradition on our show. Our podcast covers everything in basketball culture, what makes the game of hoops so great. So you can take this question any way you want it. What is your first or favorite basketball memory?
Well, I have a lot of them. Favorite basketball memory would definitely be involving my son. I was set to announce a Lady Vols game back when Pat Summitt was the head coach. And I did a lot of their games with Pat and had a very good close relationship with Pat. But at the time, there was the media relations director for women's basketball. Her name was Deborah Jennings. She went by DJ. And so I have some family in Tennessee. I was going to be calling a game on ESPN with Abby Wayner, who played at Duke, which is funny because I'm a North Carolina guy. So, we had the rivalry. But anyway, so I had told DJ, Deborah, that I was bringing my family to that game and wanted to make sure that I could get them into the game. And so she asked me about David. At that time, he was 8 years old, and he had just made his first 10 and under travel basketball team. So I just told her about David and Julie, my wife. So we get to shoot around, and they came with me. At Tennessee, back when Pat was the coach, she had an interesting tradition that you don't see anywhere else in the country as far as where I announce now. Game day shoot-arounds were open to the public. And so I told my wife and son, look, you guys, I want you to come to shoot around, but I need you to stay where everyone else is, which is in the stands, because I don't want them to think I'm expecting special treatment for my family. So you can watch shoot around. David, I will introduce you to Pat when the practice is over, but just stay where you are. So shoot around's about to begin. Pat, Dean Lockwood, her assistant, Holly Warlick, and Mickey DeMoss, they're walking toward us. And so we meet them at half court just to say hello. We're, a couple of minutes into the conversation, and I feel this little growth pop up next to me on my side. And I look down, and it is my 8-year-old son. and he had jumped the fence, jumped the railing, and was out on the court. And I just said, Pat, before he loses his mind, this is my son, David, and he really wanted to meet you. And she said, well, hello, David. She kneeled down. How are you doing, buddy? Good to see you. Just great. And I said, thank you, Pat. And I said, okay, buddy, run back up to mom. So practice goes, shoot around's over, and Pat and her assistants are coming back over to Abby and I at the table. Well, the other assistants continue to come toward us. Pat deviates, looks up at my son and says, David, come here a minute. I want to talk to you. And she brings him down. She sits with him on the bench, just she and my son, David. And she is, we're on a Zoom, so I can't get close, but she's about this close to his face throughout the entire conversation. Just having the sweetest talk with him, signs a hat. He still has the hat in his bedroom to this day, and he's 25 years old.
Oh, cool.
And so she gets up, and I just said, Pat, thank you so much. You know, that just means so much. And she said, well, where are y'all going? What are you doing now? I said, well, we're going back to the hotel. Well, you know, we have the game in a few hours. She said, no, you're not. You're coming with me. We're going to watch film. So she took Abby, the analyst, and my family, my wife and son, into the film room. And it's right off the court at that time, Thompson Bowling Arena. Players stand up when we walk in. It's just, you know, the most hospitable, polite team. And we go to the back of the room, and she says, nope, David, come on down here. I want you to be with me. So she sits David on his lap, on her lap, and she says, hey, everybody, you guys know Sam and Abby are doing the game tonight, but this is his son, David. And David is a lefty. And everybody's like, woo, David, lefty. And she says, so David, tell everybody your favorite team. And my wife and I look at each other and go, oh my gosh, he's going to say Tar Heels. And he's 8 years old and says, well, men or women? And she said, well, women, what do you think? And he said, Lady Vols. And they went, woo. So he sat with her the entire film session. And just as she would communicate to the team out loud, she would kneel into him on her lap and whisper in his ear. And he heard things like sprint to the paint and get down on defense and things that he then took into his basketball career. And it was probably just the most magical day for the greatest of all time in terms, in my opinion, of women's basketball coaches and coaches in general, really. You could put her on the Mount Rushmore of coaching. To see my son not as the ESPN announcer's kid, but as a little boy who was 8 years old and had just gotten started in his basketball career and wanted to pour into him little aspects about the game of basketball. And so that's probably my favorite memory where my work life and my personal life collided. But as a child that grew up in North Carolina during the Dean Smith era of Tar Heel basketball, I got a lot of basketball memories.
No, that's incredible. I couldn't imagine having that experience that's once ever, not even a lifetime. But yeah, that's awesome that she did that. Not surprising just hearing all the other stories about Pat Summitt and just her hospitality either. So that's incredible.
Yeah, she was an amazing woman. One of those people that Billie Jean King is very similar. I work in a lot of sports, and there's just a few people that when you meet them, they have an aura about them that is clothed in humility. And so you just feel the greatness pouring off them. Dean Smith was the same way. It's just almost another level of human being.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I want to jump into your coverage of college basketball. And you mentioned you covered a wide range of sports. So can you just jump in specifically your journey into covering women's college basketball? Like, what was your first game? How did it come about? What was kind of your journey into, this arena?
Well, when ESPNU was created, they decided to go in-house and find announcers that were working in other sports that had had a lot of college sports experience. At that time, my role at ESPN was strictly professional tennis. And so I had called college basketball when I graduated from North Carolina. My first play-by-play job was the voice of the UNC Wilmington Seahawks. So I did all of the UNC Wilmington men's basketball games for years, even though I was a Tar Heel graduate. So because of my college basketball background, I was a natural to be one of the first basketball play-by-play announcers. We weren't doing any women's games at that time. It was all just a minimum amount of men's college basketball. mostly ACC and SEC games, especially for me. I was pretty much in the SEC. So one day, the coordinating producer at the time, his name is Chris Farrow, he called me up and he said, "Hey, look, I know you're doing men's games for us, but we're going to create an SEC women's basketball package, and I think you'd be a really good fit for that. And so I want you to start next season doing the women's games." And I love basketball. So, I mean, you could stick me out in an elementary school or a YMCA, and I'd love to watch basketball. So I didn't care what it was. And so that was how I got started. The next year, I was strictly SEC women's basketball games, and those games are Thursdays, Sundays, occasionally Mondays for us. And that was really my first exposure to the highest level of women's basketball, and I've never left.
When putting together a broadcast, can you walk our audience just through your day, just in terms of just when you wake up in the morning during a game day to when the day is finished, just how that goes, calling a women's college basketball game compared to tennis or other sports?
Well, I mean, most college team sports are fairly similar. Like for me, I'm mostly doing women's college basketball and volleyball as well. So it's very similar. On game day, you have in women's college basketball a shoot around. So Tamika Catchings is my partner on women's college basketball for the most part. So Tamika and I go to the game day shoot arounds. And at that point, we've already had our charts done. We've already talked about storylines, but we will sit with the media direct relations contact for the team, and we will ask questions about players, and we'll get extra information that we're going to want to use in the broadcast that night. At the end of the shoot around, they usually give us an opportunity to speak to whoever we want to speak to in terms of players. So we'll have a brief chat with them just to cover some things that we want to make sure that we bring up in the game. And then we meet one-on-one or one-on-two with the head coach and go over their game plan and the things that they're planning on doing during the game and ask any follow-up questions. And then usually we come back to the game about an hour and a half before tip, and we'll rehearse about 30 minutes before we go on the air, our open. And then when the game starts, we're off and running. But for me, all of my prep I want done before I travel. So if I have a Sunday game, I've already done my boards. I've already thought about the storylines in the game. I've already reached out to the media relations person to ask him specific questions about things that I want to bring up. And I'm more of a storyteller. So I do a lot of work on that end. I don't just look at the basketball information that we're given. I try to dig up some things that would make a viewer interested in that player beyond basketball. So that's one of the things that I always effort to do.
How important is that to tell stories and give background? Because I think when I hear that from a commentator, it makes me more invested into the broadcast. I love hearing the X's and O's, really get into the minutia of basketball, but also hearing the stories of a lot of these players too. They're all very interesting. They all come from different backgrounds, and I feel like that's underreported in a lot of different athletes, and not just in basketball, just in sports in general. We don't really get to hear those stories, maybe a couple for a broadcast here or there, but I just love hearing just you focus on storytelling. Can you explain how that's
Well, for me, I feel like when you're doing a game, you need to give people a reason to watch. And that doesn't have to do with the score or sometimes even how good a game it is. So if a player is at the free throw line, you have your moment to share some information about that player that would cause the viewer that may not otherwise be interested in the game to stay with the game. If the player at the free throw line, is getting her pilot's license because one day she wants to fly for an airline, and you go into a conversation about that, or she's a scratch golfer aside from tennis and was a basketball is a junior golf champion, or she's the daughter of so and so, those create interest in a viewer that are beyond the game. So if the game is uninteresting, or even it makes it even better when it is interesting, you're still going to watch, because now suddenly as a human being, you have a connection to that athlete. And one of the things I love about women's basketball, especially, most of the players that reach the Division I, like SEC, ACC, Power Four level, they have incredible stories that involve their journey to get to where they are. And most of the time, they played other sports and they have a lot of other outside interests that someone like my wife, for example, would just find absolutely fascinating. She doesn't care that they've made, their last 10 free throws. But if I throw out a really cool story about their parents or their grandmother or their, some hobby or activity or something that they've done inspiring to overcome some adversity, that would make her continue to watch.
That totally makes sense. And like I said before, it does make me more invested into the broadcast. Have you experienced yourself or your broadcast partner? You mentioned you put all this prep in before you travel, but sports is very unpredictable. Anything can happen. So, has there been circumstances that's kind of knocked your preparation out of whack just due to something on the court that's unexpected, outside of an injury, but like something to do with the arena or some kind of unusual circumstance?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we would need a few hours. I always say there's never such thing as a perfect show. Usually you deal with some sort of issue at some point in a broadcast that you just have to pretend isn't happening or deal with it. I remember a couple of years ago in March Madness, Tamika and I, our site was Kentucky, and we were about to come on the air. We were one of the ESPN games. I don't remember who. I know Kentucky was playing. I don't remember who they were playing. Maybe Kansas State, or it might have been before their second round game. May have been against Liberty. But anyway, so we have gone through our rehearsal. We're about to come on the air. And in the 10 count to come on air, someone on press row pulled some plug that they weren't supposed to pull, and all of the audio went out. So we had absolutely no audio coming on the air in the 10 count before the game. So at that point, we had an excellent producer, James Davis, and he went straight to Bristol. We've lost audio. Studio needs to take the game. And so they called probably the first 10 minutes of the game from the studio at ESPN until they figured out what plug got pulled and how to put it back in. So yeah, we've had situations like that. I had a game at Auburn one time where a tornado was suddenly coming toward the arena, and we had to stop the game, and everybody had to go into the locker rooms and into the hallways in the middle of the game because a tornado was out there. Usually it's a technical issue where something will just stop working, and you just have to deal with it. I've gone into an open before when the monitor has gone out. So obviously in the open, that's when you're relying on the monitor. There's no game to call. You're just talking about the things the viewer is seeing at home. So fortunately, we had done a good rehearsal, and I just had to tell our producer, look, you need to tell me what's on the screen so I can pretend I'm seeing it and talk about it. And that's when you really need good communication with your producer, because he suddenly became my eyes so that we could just pretend that we were seeing what wasn't there.
No, that's crazy. I couldn't imagine that. It is so many variables in terms of unpredictability. Does When that happens and then you go back on the air, do you still stick with the game plan, or do you guys have to adapt? It's like all bets are off at this point. Like you mentioned, like there's a tornado, you guys survived it, the game goes on, or when a monitor goes out and then the broadcast does resume. How do you kind of get back on the right track and kind of resume what you planned on before that unfortunate circumstance happened?
I mean, really, you have to decide, okay, did the viewer know this was happening? So if it's clear to you as a viewer that we're having some sort of issue, then obviously we will take the time to explain, because I think it's inappropriate to just ignore some glaring technical problem as if it never happened and then it gets fixed and you just keep going. So if I know that the viewer has been impacted by whatever issue we had, I'll explain what happens. Just like we're all in the room watching the same game. Hey, here's what just happened. But also, if you're unaware that we've had a technical issue, I just have to have the discipline to continue on as if there was not an issue, not get upset, not get freaked out, just carry on.
No, that's yeah, that takes just a lot of just improvisation, adaptability, and preparation. So yeah, that's incredible that you've gone through that. Can you talk about just the chemistry you have with your color and commentators, just how does that work? You mentioned you work with Tamika Catchings. What's the difference in forming a relationship with a color commentator in basketball compared to the other sports? And like, does it matter? Is it more of a personality fed, or does it matter more about the sport in terms of making sure your timing is right? Everybody's different. Everybody's human. Everybody has their strengths and weaknesses and what they want to focus on. How do you kind of focus on getting that chemistry on track?
I mean, the focus is the same for every sport pretty much. As a play-by-play person, if we want to stick to basketball, I've always seen myself as the point guard. So the game is not about me. I'm not going to be the star. I'm not going to be the high scorer. It's my job to get the ball to my best player so that she can be the star and she can get all the points. So I just offer up a lot of assists, okay, if that's a way you put it. So when I approach basketball, one of the first things I do is I like to get to know who I'm working with. And beyond their basketball, just knowing them as a person and sort of reading their personality, because some people are very extroverted. Some people are very introverted. You'd be surprised that are on television. Some people have things that they don't like to talk about, and yet they have things that they're experts in. So one of the first questions I ask an analyst after we get to know each other is, hey, if I told you to do a lecture on a dynamic in basketball, what would it be on? What do you love about basketball? What's your big thing? Are you a defensive person? Do you love the three-point shot? Do you love getting it in the paint? Do you like full court pressure? I try to find out what the analyst is really interested in. And then as we get going, I try to tailor questions that allow them to be comfortable answering them. Because the last thing I need to do is, if I'm working with someone, and it doesn't matter how great a player they were, if I'm asking them a question about an area of basketball that they just, that's not their thing, that's not what made them great, well, then it's not going to be very good for the viewer. And in terms of an interesting thing about Tamika, when we first started working together, I remember we were going over a game, and one of our executives had said, Tamika, when we go into the huddle in this situation, I want you to think like a coach. So what would what would you be doing as a coach? And Tamika, because she's just incredibly intelligent and has a lot of emotional intelligence, she said, time out. I was never a coach. I never wanted to be a coach. I have no idea what the coach wants to say. And so I said, well, how about if we approach it this way? You are one of the greatest basketball players of all time. So in the huddle in this situation, what would you want to hear from your coach right now? And it was like, boom. Oh, yeah. Oh, I got that. Yeah, totally. And actually, it's not really that much different than what a coach would, if you were saying, what would the coach say? She just had to think about it differently. As a player, what do I want the coach to tell me right now? What am I expecting us to do? And had I not known that she did not like to acknowledge what a coach thinks, I never would have known to ask her those questions. So it's really about just kind of taking the time to get to know the people you work with, because in the end, that allows it to be a more fun watch for the viewer, which is why I'm doing this anyway. I'm always thinking about who's watching this game and what do they want to know, and what can I ask this person that will answer those questions.
In terms of just where women's college basketball is going in terms of NIL, or just the talent you're seeing compared to other years, or just other observations you've had, just the game currently in 2026, what's kind of your prevailing feelings just about what you're observing in women's college basketball overall?
Well, I don't think it's ever been more popular, and the popularity continues to grow every year because the product just continues to get better. Girls now come to their freshman season and they're stars. They're ready to play. You don't have the same development process for the most part at the highest level of Division I that maybe you did in the past, because players are so skilled now when they get to college. The thing that I love about women's college basketball, because it fits my personality, I'm a relationship person. So when I am involved in any sport, I don't want to just show up and call the game and go home. I like to get to know the people that I'm talking about. And women's college basketball is very open to that. If I walk into a gym, I am getting to know players from the time they're freshmen till the time they're seniors. And even if they transfer, I'm probably going to have them at another school. So the women's game tends to be, I don't want to say it's friendlier, but there are relationships that last in that sport. They're better at when I show up for a practice, coaches are coming over to talk to us. They want us to present their team. They want to give us information, and they trust that we're not there to dig up some dirt or controversy. We're there to make everybody look good and grow the game. So I think that women's college basketball is still in that growth mindset that they like to get to know the people that are talking about their teams, and they invest back in that relationship. For example, my mother passed away in January this year, and I got, flowers sent to me from the Kentucky women's team, a note from the Alabama team. And it's just, you just feel a level of camaraderie and family in women's college basketball at all levels of Division I. So I like being in that space. I like being in the women's game because if I post something on Instagram today, and you can see who looked at it, for example, a lot of the people that are looking at my posts were former women's college basketball players that are now either in the private sector or playing in the WNBA. They never forget. When you form a friendship or a relationship in women's college basketball, it tends to last. And I love that. And I think that's one of the reasons it's growing in popularity, because the women's teams do such a good job connecting with their communities. So they work hard to put fans in the stands. And then once the fans come to the games, you see teams staying after games, whether they win or lose. They're signing autographs. They're handing things out. The women's game just seems to connect with their fans and the TV broadcasters as well in a way that I really like. And so I always have a smile on my face when I know I'm about to start college basketball, because I feel like I'm about to, enter into a world of, first of all, an incredible sport, especially in the SEC where I spend most of the season. And I'm going to be among friends and family and learn new stories and connect with new young people that are very open to wanting to grow and be better.
That totally makes sense. I want to ask you a final question from what you said earlier. Just you seeing the level of play increase from when a player enters as a freshman. Can you speak upon that compared to when you first started calling women's college basketball? Is there a increase of the level of play that you're seeing nowadays from incoming freshmen? Is that just due to just the changing dynamic of how a lot of players are developing outside of high school and club teams, that you're seeing players more at a premium level when they first enter college as opposed to when you first started? Can you just talk about just how the development has grown over time, you think?
Well, I can only speak for me about the SEC and the ACC, and Big 12 a little bit, but that's primarily where I spend most of the season. Now in the postseason, I'm all over the place. But right now, in the past, you used to see freshmen come in where maybe the coach had a spot and they were taking a chance. Like, this girl is going to come walk on and we're going to use her as a practice player, and we think she could end up being something good down the road. You had a big drop off between your starters and the end of the bench. Now, with NILs, with the transfer portal, you very rarely see anyone on a roster that couldn't start in the ACC or SEC anywhere else in the country. I mean, every player that is on a roster in those two conferences, specifically where I spend most of my season, they could go to most other leagues and get significant playing time or maybe start, because the SEC and the ACC pretty much are getting the cream of the crop. So they're no longer needing to bring kids in to be walk-ons or take a chance. They can get a championship ready player right away, either out of high school or in the portal. And so the teams are just better than they used to be.
No, that's incredible. I've noticed that too. just in terms of just the level of competition that's seen through all different conferences. So that's wonderful to see. Sam, thank you very much for the time. Truly appreciate it. Can you let our audience know if you're located on social media, again, where they can catch your up here? It covers so many sports, so you probably have something coming up soon where they can catch you on ESPN. Anything else you want our audience to be aware of?
No, I'm at Sam Gore. For me, my next assignment is the U.S. Open tennis, and then I'll be going into women's college volleyball and then basketball. Basketball and volleyball actually overlap in November, so I'm doing both of those sports in November, and then all women's college basketball after volleyball ends in mid-December. But I do a pretty good job of documenting everywhere I am and what I'm doing. So if you're interested in the life of a broadcaster, you can check it out at Sam Gore. But more than anything else, I want you to watch these incredible women's college basketball players in the season this year.
Awesome. Sam, thank you very much for the time. Truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, Justin, thank you.